Welcome to this week's Think Deeper. I'm Jack Wilkie, joined by Will Harab and Joe Wilkie once again. This week, we're continuing our talk about money with a little bit of a different angle. We're going to get to that in just a minute. I want to remind you guys again, we've got 3 brand new books rolling off the presses here any day now, pre-order. In fact, I was involved with all 3 of them. A Gospel of Mark study guide, a book called Transform Faith that is a collection of writings from myself and Dr. Brad Harab over the years that's really trying to build out the Christian worldview on the specifics of the Christian life and pressing issues of the day. So that's called Transform Faith. And then the Sunday School Catch-Up, which is for people who didn't grow up in the church or people who feel a little behind in Bible classes or sermons, kind of helping your Bible literacy. And so all 3 of those are on the way. Again, they're in pre-order status. I know some people are not quite familiar with the terminology. We'll get a pre-order and a week later to say, hey, where's my book? It's going to be a little bit. We're getting there. We're finalizing cover designs and layouts and proofing and all that. And we're ready to hit print on these pretty soon. But keep an eye out for that. And I think the 2 books that we've been teasing for the longest are in production as well. They're not up for pre-order, but Dr. Brad and Melinda Harab's parenting book won't be too far behind. And then my follow-up to Church Reset is not too far behind. I know, Joe, were you guys writing that together, or was that just a solo project, Joe?
Yeah, mainly me. But if Will has any ideas of what he wants, I am more than happy. I sent it his way of like, hey, just look over it if you have things you want to add. So it may
if I
be
had unlimited hours, I for sure would want to join in on that. Yes.
Yeah, that's my problem is exactly the hours. But yeah, we got another book, and I don't know if it's going to be 101, 150 rules, 201 rules. I keep adding to the rules. I'll read things on Twitter, and I'm like, man, that's really good. I got to add that, And so I'm compiling different masculinity things, and so it's going to be a gym podcast production. Basically, we're gonna have that come out with 4 gym podcasts, which is why I'm going to have Will involved. His name's probably going to be on the book one way or the other, because the gym podcast is our thing. It's a joint project, and I want this to be a joint project as well. And so that hopefully will be coming
But 100,
out.
100 and whatever rules to being a man is what it's going to be.
Correct.
Called.
Yeah, 101 rules being a man, or however many rules we end up having. But we're excited for that one too.
Yeah, so those are more projects in the pipeline. But again, you can pre-order currently those first 3 I mentioned: Gospel of Mark, Transform Faith, and Sunday School Catch-Up. And so you go to focuspress.org/shop, and it's just under the new category, and check those out. All right, let's get into the episode. We spoke about money last week, Christian money management, earning money, the idolatry of money, but also the downplaying of money as unimportant. And so we got into all that. But then one of the things about money is kind of our cultural view of money, our political view of money, things like that. And especially as it comes to being Christians, we're supposed to be charitable. We're supposed to give. And so a lot of Christians, especially in the last, 10 years or so, have really gone to this ideology that socialism or some form of socialism, democratic socialism, Bernie Sanders, all of those things are what Christians should do because, hey, they're all about, hey, healthcare, free healthcare for everybody. How can Christians be against caring for people? I mean, the Good Samaritan didn't he? And free education, free college debt paid off, all of these things that the democratic socialist platform is behind. And, you read some stuff and they can make a case and they can throw scriptures at you to say, this is clearly what Jesus wants, is that Christians should vote for these things. Christians should advocate for these things. Christians should get behind these things. And so we wanted to talk about that, but not just about socialism, because this isn't a voting issue, or this isn't a voting episode. This isn't strictly politics. I think there's some underlying things to this discussion we're going to get to at the end that it kind of reveals about the way we think, the way we process things culturally. And so we're going to get to those bigger kind of foundational issues at the end. But we're going to start with a discussion of socialism. So I'm going to get into defining the terms, and then I'll let you guys go with where we stand on it. And then we'll get into some of the arguments and go over those. Most of the time when people say socialism, they're talking about state ownership and redistribution of resources. Socialized medicine would be the state is paying for everybody's health care. The state has kind of intervened in that they're the new middleman between the customer and the doctor. socialized education. I mean, we kind of have that to a degree. We've got a few things that are socialized in that sense, and so it's just the state redistribution. A lot of times the socialists themselves will run in and say, no, 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 no. Socialism is when the workers own the means of production. And so businesses and all that kind of being returned to the people that do the work, and that the labor is where the real value is and not the ownership. And um, the landlord thing of you should own the property, and it should be wrong to rent out property. It's the people who live there and take care of it. I mean, it's all of those kinds of ideas. And so, I mean, to give you an illustration of the means of production thing, my dad started a plumbing company, as we've talked about. And there's this idea that the people that dig the holes and repair the pipes, that's their company. They're doing the work. And so the workers should own the means of production. That is the more technical definition of socialism. That's what the socialists often mean. That's not usually what people mean when they're talking about socialism, when Bernie Sanders talks about democratic socialism. So those are the two terms we're talking about here, mainly that first one. But let's get into, why is this not a Christian belief? Why is, oh man, giving people free stuff, free healthcare, free food, free education, free whatever you want to say, the state paying for it? Why not?
Well, and I would say, sorry, real quick, I would
Go for it, go
say
for it.
it has the allure for people of caring and kindness, as you pointed out, Jack. Like, what Christian would be against everybody having available healthcare, everybody, having access to those things? But the other thing it has the allure of is equality. Is everybody's on the same playing field? There is no, or there to obviously, as much as they would like to get it this way, there is no big wealth gap. Everybody's equal. Those are two things that appeal to a lot of people. Again, kindness and caring, which we should be kind and caring, but equality is a big one as well. And I think that's going to be kind of a, I guess, point that we want to get at in this episode is that, listen, equality is a buzzword. Equality is not necessarily something that the Bible talks about, and especially in terms of wealth, but as we talked about in terms of roles within the church, and in terms of a lot of things. But society wants to push everything to, we got to be equal, got to be equal, got to be equal, got to be equal. And we don't see it that way according to scripture. And so I wanted to point that out real quick, that's the allure of it, and why a lot of people can fall for these articles that talk about Jesus being a socialist, or these articles that talk about socialism being a good thing, is because it's like caring for people and equality. Man, who wouldn't sign up for that? So, Joe, I don't know if you want to get into maybe.
That's such a good point. It has the sound of wisdom. It just sounds good. We're taking care of one another, and sure, we're all for that. We're going to come to
and
that.
Nobody's better than anybody else. Yeah,
right. Exactly. We're going to come to the end of that, and some people use the end of Galatians 3, right? There's neither slave nor free man, right? There's no Jew nor Gentile or male or female, right?
we're all one in Christ.
It's a utopia of equality. We're all one. We're all the same. So that's really, come on now. We are going to come to that in the outline of maybe how we can work on some of those things, and some of the more appealing parts, quote unquote, and what we think about that. But why it's wrong. First and foremost, the thing that comes to my mind is, look at all of the parables that Jesus taught concerning masters and either slaves or the vineyard worker, right? And the workers in the vineyard. The guy who gives the talents and he goes on a faraway trip. I mean, Jesus had so many opportunities to say, there's no need for a master. There shouldn't be any, and really the masters should be probably serving the servants in in that role, and they should be dispersing their wealth. And then Paul comes in later, and he's got Ephesians 6 and he's got Colossians 4, and instead of, hey, slaves, you're working unto the Lord, more than unto your masters. Why doesn't he come in and just tell the masters to disperse the wealth? Why doesn't he come in and really get onto them? It's the same argument kind of John the Baptist not telling the soldiers, hey, leave the army for the pacifism, right? Like, he had a perfect opportunity to set the record straight as to what he wanted. And instead, he doesn't blow up the entire structure of the owner and, the slaves or whatever, of the master. He keeps that structure. It's just both have a role to play within that structure. The master being good, but not turning everything over to them. That's first
real quick, and then you can keep rolling. You brought the parable of the talents. Why didn't he give them all the same amount of talents? Why didn't he give all of them 10 or all of them 5 or all of the right? That's not the way.
Some of the socialists will point to the one about the laborers that showed up at 9 in the morning and 11 in the morning and 3. Hey, they all got paid the same. Yeah. Like, okay, talk about taking something out of context, but
that's exactly it. Yeah.
that, I mean, God is able to give the wage that he wants. And yeah, we labor for him, but it's not, then you're kind of get into a works-based salvation. You're stretching the analogy in a direction it wasn't meant to
That's
go.
exactly it. We're talking spiritual, not the physical redistribution of wealth here. Like he's physically redistributing heaven. There's a spiritual element of we all get the same reward of getting to walk with Christ. I mean,
Well,
getting
and
to
it's
go to heaven.
funny with that parable, Will brought up the point of equality, and you'll hear equality of outcome is what socialists want, is no matter how hard you work, no matter how smart you are, no matter what decisions you make, you should end up in the same place. Everybody should end up in the same place. And obviously that's ridiculous. And so people would say, we don't want equality of outcome. We want equality of opportunity. That's not biblical either. We spoke last week about the wise man builds an inheritance for his children. If your parents leave you something, it's not an equal opportunity. And that's where you kind of see these the bigger some of these states grow and the more socialist they become, it's a 100% inheritance tax. You can't pass things on to your kids because they're trying to flatten, that hey, you shouldn't get a head start just because your parents did well. Well, that's not biblical. And so equality of opportunity, no, I don't believe in that either. I want to give my kids a better start. I want to get them to that place, but again, socialism, again, even anti-socialist people get into this equality language, and it's like it's just not there.
Right. And that literally is the American dream of I'm going to give to my kids something that I didn't have. I'm going to be better for them. That's why so many people come over to America to be able to give their kids what they didn't have. I mean, that's just human nature of wanting to do it. And so, I think there's a flattening of human nature itself when they're trying to do it. But another reason, kind of going back to your why this is wrong, going back to your definition of the state ownership and dispersing redistribution of resources and wealth and everything, Jesus wanted us to give and he wanted us to give cheerfully. He expects us to voluntarily give. Where's the voluntary part of coming in and going, well, that's ours and redistributing? This is the church's, and therefore we're going to take it and move it to where we think. That's not you being able to voluntarily, cheerfully give. That's taxes, is really what it is. We're going to take what's yours and we're going to figure out where we're going to give it best. Therefore, I'm not cheerful in giving. It's a duty at that point, I suppose, but I'm not cheerful in voluntarily giving. And so I think that's another thing that I would say is against that form of socialism, which once again they may look at and go, well, no, we're talking a different form. This is what socialism ends
We've
up being.
we've hit Proverbs so much in the last few episodes because it pertains so much to this discussion. But you think about how many of the Proverbs get nullified essentially if this socialism is the way we were supposed to go. If it is a redistribution of wealth, you can just imagine the proverb of like the hand of the diligent makes everybody else around him rich, right? Like the hand, work hard for your wages so that you can leave an inheritance for everybody else. Like that's not what the Proverbs talk about. The Proverbs talk about you working hard, you go to the ant, instead of being a sluggard, you make sure and be diligent and actually work hard. Why? It's not for everybody else. And that's, we've had our giving discussion last episode. It's obviously Christians should be giving people, but to your point, Joe, voluntarily giving out of their, out of the way that they're prospered. And then another thing we've got on here, we're supposed to give of our own money.
Right.
Like that implies that you are working for your money,
right.
And then you voluntarily decide I'm going to give it. This socialism concept, again, nullifies that. It's, everybody owns everything and you don't really have proper ownership of the things that you have. And it's just, it's antithetical to what we see in Proverbs, and it's antithetical to what Jesus taught. But again, equality, kindness sounds nice to everybody. And again, this speaks to why Christians need to spend more and more time in the Proverbs, because Proverbs are about you work hard, you make money, you take care of your family.
Yeah, it's amazing like how people can be so self-congratulatory, patting themselves on the back for their generosity of the plans they make to give away somebody else's money. I mean, there's all this, the 1%, the one, Bernie Sanders, the 1%, the 1%. Like, Bernie, you own like 6 houses, man.
Yeah.
Like, why you have to go after these people? Don't you have a responsibility here? Well, no, it's always somebody else's. And that doesn't make you a generous person. I mean, when we talk about giving, it is about sacrificial giving. It's about looking at what you have and saying, how can I share with the people around me, and doing something of what is my own and passing that around. And that is not this. And so the idea of we'll go down to the voting booth or we'll advocate for policies that make somebody else give away their money, make the government go in and seize somebody else's assets to give to somebody else. where do you get that? Why does that
Yeah.
make you generous? Why does that
That's
make you
such a good
Christ-like?
point. You got the widow's mite, and she's like, you know what? I'm going to keep my mite, but this Pharisee's super rich, so I just broke into his house and stole all his stuff. I'll put that in there. Like,
I'll give his
yeah,
stuff.
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Boy, that's what we see. Yeah,
Let
and
me go ahead, Joe. Finish
no,
your
I
thought.
was just gonna say, and that again, it's just a good point. That's what makes this so infuriating. Is yes, the poor, you're supposed to still give out of your poorness, and this is the point that Paul makes in 2 Corinthians 8:9. Is he's looking at saying the Macedonians gave, and those people are dirt poor. Like they were willing to give to my cause, and they have nothing. You guys have plenty here in Corinth. You guys are very wealthy. Those who had nothing gave out of their basically out of their poverty, and they gave liberally. They gave amazingly, and so he's kind of throwing some shade at the Corinthians for having all of this money and not doing anything with it. And so we look at those who are on welfare and those who are the poorer of society. And yeah, it sounds so great to vote money onto everybody else and to
Well,
say, well, let's take everybody else. Where in the world, why in the world would we think that is an attribute, a positive attribute?
what's frustrating about it is those who will be proponents of socialism will make all these points about how for the capitalists, money is an idol and money is the driving force. Is that not the exact same thing with socialism? It just takes on a different form of like those who are less wealthy are still idolizing the wealthy of the rich and they want it redistributed. That's still idolization of wealth and idolization of money. It just takes a bit of a different form. And so that's typically a stone that will be cast at those who, capitalists, of like, well, you're turning money into an idol. That's exactly and from my point of view, at least, that's exactly the same thing the socialists do.
I want to say two things on this before we move on to some of the arguments. Number one, faithful in little, faithful in much. And it's very easy to look, well, if I had $1 billion, I would, okay, what are you doing with what you have? Are you giving the widow's mite? Are you, you have opportunity today. What are you doing with it? Because if you're not doing it now, you wouldn't do it if you had $1 billion. So it's very easy to look and be like, well, those guys, if somebody as good as me were in their position, well, you're in your position. So what are you doing with it?
That's a
But
great point.
to your point as well, Will, we didn't I wanted to get to this a little bit last week when we were talking about kind of the Christian demonization of wealth and the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. It's true, and it is hard for a rich man to enter heaven. Those scriptures are all there. But interestingly, when he talks about for the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil, the verse before that is the one that says those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare. We make that about rich people. There's a lot of people who don't have anything that want to get rich, that wish they could, that are out buying lottery tickets, that are
Yep.
out trying to hit it big, trying to do the next get rich quick scheme because man, they really want to be rich. And that's one of the things that often, I mean, you kind of pull back the curtain behind socialism. It's envy. It's
Right.
you have what I don't have. I want it. I want to take it from you, so I and my buddies have it. And that's a desire to get rich. That's a desire to have something that's not yours. And I mean, James talks about that when you have those desires you want and you don't ask and you don't have and all of those things. And so no, there's very nefarious motives behind it. There's very, envy and things that, we look at people that have money and go, oh man, rich, they love money. Well, people who don't have money can love money
That
just
was
as much.
yeah, that's what I was trying to get at with the idolization is still there.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah,
takes a different form.
exactly.
Let me play devil's advocate for just a second here. And this is the next thing we wanted to bring up because people will point to verses like I'm about to read to say the early church was a socialist community. This is the the goal of what we should be trying to work towards. So you got verses like Acts chapter 2, of course, we know verse 38. We know 3,000 were baptized. I'll start in verse 43. Then fear came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done through the apostles. Now all who believed were together and had all things in common, sold their possessions and goods, and divided them to all, to anyone who had need. You skip over to chapter 4. You see, starting in verse 32, the multitude of those who believed were of one heart and one soul. Neither did anyone say that any of the things he possessed was his own, but they had all things in common. Skipping down to verse 34, nor was there anyone among them who lacked, for all who were possessors of lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of the things that were sold and laid them at the apostles' feet, and they distributed to each as anyone who has need. Guys, sounds like the early church was socialist. Sounds like that's exactly what we need to be heading towards here. Again, people will point to these verses and essentially think that it's a slam dunk, in the face of the capitalist here. What's our response to that?
The term sharing is caring comes to mind. There's a difference between I'm sharing what is mine with somebody else, which is a very loving and kind and Christian thing to do, and Peter and John coming in and going, all right, that's ours. we're going to reallocate these funds because you're too rich, and we're going to give it to so and so because he's not rich enough. And so, I'm glad that you really worked hard for what you have, but come on, that's ours now.
Or the
No.
church saying, you know what, these widows aren't getting fed, they're not getting their bread. So we all got together and voted and decided we're going to go take Cornelius's house and sell it so
Yeah,
that,
that's right.
which Cornelius wasn't there in Acts 6. My timeline's a little messed up, but one of the
It's
rich
Barnabas.
okay.
guys, yeah.
Yeah.
And we're going to go take his stuff and sell it. And sorry, buddy. I mean, how the vote came out.
That's what we decided. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Peter just going like, all right, you don't have that anymore. That's mine now. Like that's,
And that speaks to our point about it was voluntary. They
well,
were
even with
deciding.
Ananias and Sapphira, he said when you had it, it was in your control.
Right. You could have done
Yeah.
whatever. They didn't get in trouble for not giving. And I think that kind of gets mischaracterized of, well, that's not the problem.
They didn't.
They
I
lied
was just
about what
gonna.
they said they were going to.
Yeah, the people think, well, because they didn't get all of it, that was, or give all of it, that was the problem. No, the problem was they gave some of it and tried to pretend like it was all of it.
It's exactly it. You lied to the Spirit. And he literally makes the point, this was yours to do what you wanted with, pretty much. But don't say you're going to do something, or don't say that you did do something when you're lying to the Spirit. And this is right on the heels of the verse you just read. That's the very next thing. 32, I think, leads right into chapter 5 of like, yeah, and then there's Ananias and Sapphira. Everybody's giving of themselves, and then here comes these people who claim that they did and they lied about it, and that was a problem. So we can easily look at that and make the case that, oh well, they just didn't give everything, and that's the problem. That's why they were killed. No, that's not it at all. It has to be something that is coming again from a voluntary, cheerful giving. That part cannot be stated enough. And in socialism, there's a reason you look at all the socialist countries that have gone socialist and Marxist around the world. Does anybody smile? No.
It's not this utopia that they make it
That's
out to be.
Venezuela, and you look at Russia, and you look at the places that have really tried to apply this. Brutal living conditions. Nobody's happy. Nobody's giving voluntarily. They're taking as much as they can because they cannot make it. Because you have a governing body who's deciding who does and does not need it. You think a governing body has the opportunity, even one as small as the church? It doesn't have to be 330 million Americans. Even one as small as the Church of Christ. You think if we had a governing body and they were distributing wealth, that people wouldn't be left behind? This is
Well,
why
and just
local church bodies, should be helping and voluntarily giving to one another, which is what was happening.
well, just think about the incentivization structure. I think that's the correct use of the word there. Of okay, you've got half. Let's say you got a congregation. Half the people work really hard, half the people do not, and the church decides, all right, we're gonna redistribute resources here. We're gonna reallocate wealth here. What does that incentivize? Cool, I don't have to work that hard then, because I'm going to get, I'm going to get the benefits of everybody who does work hard. And that's what gets, at least in the economic sense, that's what to me is so frustrating, because it's just common sense that if you look around and say, it doesn't matter how hard I work, everything's going to be equal, or I'm going to get basically taken care of. What does that incentivize? Sit on your rear end and do nothing.
No,
That's
exactly,
that's the incentivization structure.
that's what Paul has to deal with in Second Thessalonians. Man does not work, neither shall he, because you had people literally doing that. Well, Jesus is coming back, so I quit. All right, I'm just going to sit here, and you guys, I'm somebody will feed me. He says, no, you feed yourself. You get up, get back out there, and get to work. I wanted to also point to, I mean, there's so many New Testament scriptures about the importance of sharing. While I'm here in 1 Timothy 6, verse 18, instruct them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share. And he tells him, Timothy, go to the rich people in your congregation and teach them to share. Teach them to be generous people, not take their money. And like, you don't have control over it. But this is one of those, I mean, I could go on a whole total side tangent of here. Could you imagine a preacher going up to some of the rich people in church being like, all right,
Pony
you're
up,
rich.
man.
We're all happy for you. You've got a really nice house, but we need you to step up. We need you to step up in your giving. Well, no, we don't do that because you don't want to drive that person away. And so like there very much is a Christian expectation of be willing to share what you have, be willing to give, be willing to, as they were doing, selling their land to give to others. And this is one of the problems with the demonization of wealth and success and all that. I know a number of really wealthy Christians who do a lot of good works. Some of the people that support a work like Focus Press, like we do, are people that have done well and are incredibly generous. But if their money was taken from them by force, like you're saying, Will, the incentive wouldn't have been there to earn it. And so it's important that we don't take that away, whether in society or in the church either, to say, all right, we're just going to demand or demonize you for what you have, that's not a good idea.
Well, and that's the utopia that we should be striving for. Not everybody's equal and has the same amount of money. It's that everybody, and I mean, we talked about this on our most recent Deep End episode for all of our Focus Plus subscribers with that came out last Friday. The fact that could you imagine if congregations made it a point to try to get their families and couples to be financially responsible? How much greater the giving could be. That's the utopia, is that everybody in your congregation, everybody that goes to your church is financially responsible enough and financially well off enough. Maybe they're not millionaires, but they're financially well off enough to where they can give and they can be generous and they can do that voluntarily, and money can just be flowing because of the financial responsibility. That's the utopia. That should be the goal, the idealistic vision, not, well, let's just get everybody on the same playing field. And again, I know we're talking more so about economics here, but man, Jack, to your point, that's exactly right. We see, Christians should be giving and caring people. And if you have a system where it's, we're going to take what you've worked for, you're going to be more tempted and more led towards, well, let me hoard what I have rather than let me share and give what I have.
Well, what you'll hear and what people are going to get, the people that are for socialism, and there are a lot of Christians, Jesus was a socialist, things like this, that push that. Don't you care about people without health care? Don't you care about the downtrodden? Don't you care about those that can't afford those things?
Real quick, what's so interesting about that, Joe, is like Jack referenced the Good Samaritan. What did the Good Samaritan do in that parable? He paid for the guy to stay at the hotel. Right. And in fact, he gave her the hotel, the inn or whatever it was. And he gave him extra money of his own, right? Exactly. Of his own money, and said, hey, hopefully this covers him. If you end up paying more, let me know. I'll pay you back. What did he do? He paid for it. It wasn't like it was just free healthcare that was provided. He actually had to go and set aside his own money voluntarily to take care of this man. It wasn't free healthcare that was paid for by the state and paid for by taxes. That's the difference.
Well, and that's where I wanted to kind of bring in some scriptures on this, because exactly to this point, we can go to Proverbs 31:8-9, open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all the unfortunate, open your mouth, judge righteously, and defend the rights of the afflicted and the needy. And then I want to flip on over real fast to the end of James 1, which of course I think we can quote, but I don't want to get it wrong, of, pure and undefiled religion. Yeah, here we go. Is in the sight of our God and Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself unstained by the world. We as Christians ought to be thinking about the poor and the downtrodden basically more than anybody, because that is our job. But this is where, I'm not going to get too political on this, but this is the problem, in the fact that we allowed the state to come in and start taking care of what was the church. So why do you think all the hospitals are named St. Thomas and St. Anthony's and St. Joseph's and St. whatever else?
The church was the one caring about the poor, or the sick,
the church was the one that did it. The church was the one that funded all of these things. And you could say the church, yes, the Catholic Church, I realize that, but like Christianity, quote unquote, people that believe in God were those that were the most generous when it came to taking care of somebody. And at some point along the way, we just said, okay, we'll step back and we allow the government to do what was our work. Now we're in a predicament because we're here, and the government goes, okay, well, we're going to take your money to do this. When in reality, we could have just done it voluntarily in the first place. I think Christians need to get back to voluntarily looking to do as much as we can to help others. And this is why ministries like Samaritan Ministries and such is big among Christians, is there is this helping one another and sharing aspect. And I know there's problems with it, and I'm not going off on the goods and bads of Samaritan Ministries, but that concept of Christians helping Christians and Christians helping others through this healthcare, that's a very real thing. And so, yeah, I think those who have the money ought to be looking for the downtrodden and seeing what we can give. Here's my question on this, though, guys. Let me turn this back around. At what point does the helping of and I'm not talking orphans and widows per se, but the downtrodden in life, when do we hit the enabling point? So in a socialist society, a lot of people, to your point, Will, are enabled and are de-incentivized, I think, to do nothing. And so it's a very enabling thing. At what point does a Christian begin to enable another person to sit on their rear and do nothing?
Well, real quick, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, is it de-incentivized? Because I've been saying de-incentivized basically for the last 3 years. So I really
what is
hope
Jack? You're
Jack,
our
you're the
resident expert
wordsmith here.
Disincentivized? Do I need to throw a third option into
Oh
the?
boy, that
I'll
better
look
not
it
be
up,
it.
Jack.
I'm
Continue
All right,
really
you
your
Google
thought.
it.
Continue your
yeah, go for
thought.
it.
Yeah.
So not only on the enabled, but there are a lot of people that have the entitled thing, and anybody who's been in ministry or eldership, you've got the people that call your church building, or maybe members who just constantly looking for a handout, looking for more. What can I get? What do you have for me? And again, the entitlement, we'd have people call up, and it was kind of like, we don't really have it right now. We just gave to a couple of other works or other people that were in need, and right now the answer is no. And I thought you were Christians. I thought
Yeah.
you cared about people. Like, the entitlement, and
Yep.
especially one of the things that really, really bugged me over the years of being a preacher, getting the calls to the church office, was people who wouldn't be caught dead darkening our door, never step foot in the church building, calling up, hey, do you guys give food support or things like that? Well, we don't have it right now. Click. Like, why are you calling up a church that you don't attend, that you have no connection to, and just, hey, give me this? But we live in this society, and again, it's kind of like, well, you're a church, you're supposed to do it, and so you deal with that entitlement, with that enabling, and I know we're supposed to give to people, but man, when that entitled attitude comes in, it's not really a nice way to do it. But again, let's say it's a member who just is in the elder's office every other month. Hey, I need help with this, I need help with that. I don't think, and we talked about this on our deep end the other day, as their spiritual leaders, their Christian life involves their financial life. Their
Yes.
stewardship of money is a Christian thing that they do. And so it is not outside of the elders' duty to say, let's help you with this. Let's get this sorted out. Let's sit down with your budget. Let's see where we can cut some costs. Let's see if we can get you some more work. But I mean, if a man
That's
doesn't work, he
exactly
shouldn't
right.
eat.
And that's what I was going to bring up. And this is the point that we have hit on for the last several months, in the sense that we cannot have it's not a gospel issue approach, which is, unless it's salvational, unless it's a doctrinal issue, that's not really anything we need to worry about. And so the fruits of that are lessons, sermons, classes that don't deal with this kind of stuff, talking about Christians and money. And another fruit of it is, as you're saying, Jack, elders and church leadership who, that's their business. That's their money. There's their financial business. We're not going to touch it. No, as you just perfectly stated, Jack, I don't want to restate it because you said it so well. But the whole idea of church leaders, if you do, to answer your question, Joe, somebody who is, let's say it's a member, repeatedly needing help, repeatedly needing assistance, I think it's within bounds for the elders and the church leaders to say, we are here to help you. We care about you as was one of our flock. We want to help you, but we want to get you. We want you to get to a point where you don't need the help anymore. And so whether that be making sure they're not racking up a ton of debt, maybe whether it be making sure that their spending is appropriate. It's the whole teach a man to fish thing, right? You don't just give him a fish over and over again. You eventually teach him to fish. And so I think that's something that is perfectly within bounds to answer your enabling question, because you don't want to be poor stewards of the Lord's money. You don't want to just be throwing money to everybody. Oh, here you go. Sure. Take this. Oh, you need help. Sure. There needs to be some wisdom in the stewardship.
So here's another question, though, that Jack gets me thinking about. What obligation does a church have to those not within the church? Should we be supportive of, and I'm not talking ministries per se, homeless ministries and such. There's a great place in, shout out Jerry Groves in Colorado, because I know he does a lot of work with the homeless. He's in a poorer part of the community, and is just one of the better personal workers among the homeless that I've seen. I don't know if he listens, but yeah, he's a great guy. But what's our obligation for those that are not part of the church, as Jack talked about? And we used to get this all the time at Miller Street. We were in another kind of a poorer part of Denver area, and we had a homeless camp like down the street, and man, we'd be hit up 24/7, and we'd try to help them, and we'd maybe give them a free night in the local hotel, and a couple Subway gift cards or whatever else. We'd never give them cash. But what's our obligation there?
So my thought, first of all, I hate admitting when Jack was correct. It is disincentivized. So Jack
Is it
wins yes, it's disincentivized.
Goodness.
Well,
that might be the first time you've ever been
so
right
frustrating.
on a word.
Yeah, I know. How about that?
I did it just for the look on your face.
Yeah, you got it.
I've been saying it wrong for 3 years. Great. So Jack gets the W on that.
You and me both.
Yeah, exactly.
You're welcome.
So my thought on your question, Joe, is first of all, Galatians 6:10, let us do good to all. But then what does he say? Especially those who are of the household of faith. What does that imply? It implies that kind of higher priority needs to go to those who are within the flock and those who are of the household of faith. And that would be my answer, is that for the most part, needs to be people within your flock. I mean, that should take at least the higher priority, the higher emphasis, but it also does say do good to all. And so I think that, personally speaking, the obligation that I wouldn't use the word obligation, I would use the word opportunity. If you have opportunity to hopefully reach somebody with the gospel, maybe show the love of Christ, and that maybe leads somewhere, do it, man. Like Jack's talking about, people calling up, but the people who are legitimately needing help, man, don't just stick them in a hotel and say, man, hope it works out for you. No, use that as an opportunity to maybe show them the love of Christ, teach them the gospel. That to me, it would be the ultimate example of what we're talking about here when you say those who are outside of the church. So that would be what I would say. Higher priority does need to go to those who are already within the flock. But when you do reach outside of the flock, man, use that as an opportunity to carry out Matthew 25, doing it under the least of those, as an opportunity to show Christ's love, as an opportunity to hopefully teach the gospel. Jack, what do you think?
Yeah, I always struggled with that. We had like fuel cards and things like that that we would have on hand when people would come by, but I don't know. Uh, the lack of relationship, and I know like there's the criticism of your benevolence always being a hook that that you're baiting for evangelism, and that it's not necessarily supposed to be that. It's not evangelism. You're just doing good to do good because God has called you to do that. But I don't know. It's if the choice is between keeping a lot of money in the budget for mission works and things, ministries of the church, versus stocking those things, or just always having something on hand, I really think we should be very much balanced to the former rather than the latter. But I mean, I don't know. It's really hard because the bigger a church gets, we weren't even that big of a church, but the bigger a church gets, man, those people get requests every single day, multiple
come out of the
times a
woodwork.
day. Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
say,
I mean,
it's
people
like the
see
guy
the
winning the
building.
lottery. Everybody
Yeah,
is your friend now.
people see the building and they go, well, they clearly have money, and so let me ask for food, let me ask for this. And I know every church comes up with different ways to deal with it. I really have a hard time, looking at the New Testament and thinking that the design was for the church to, as an institution, be a place that anybody could look and be like, well, they'll take care of me because they're supposed to, and lean on the good graces of the church. I feel like we should be much more proactive in our choices of what we're doing with our money. I'm not saying don't give money to those, but it never felt good to me. It always
Sure.
felt so cynical. Again, the entitlement of, you're a church, just give me money and I'll never talk to you again. And I don't know. It's some people have that view of the panhandlers when you get off the highway asking for money. Well, it's not my job to know what he does with it. God just tells me to give to him.
That's
I'm not sure
poor
about that
stewardship in
either.
some
Yeah,
instances.
a
That's
Look,
lot
my
of
cast
times
point.
your
you're
Yeah.
pearls
just,
before swine, a little bit.
well, yeah, and again, like, money is finite. I mean, you have to acknowledge that. And the $5 you give to them, there's a million things you could do with that $5. Is that the best use of it? And you can get into paralysis by analysis, of like never giving it to anybody because, well, but it's like, well, that one is likely throwing it down the toilet. This one is not. So I don't know. I really struggle with this one. As you can see, I don't have an answer. But now that I'm not in ministry, I've
No,
been
he's just
disincentivized from
this guy.
learning my answer. So
I was gonna say he's still celebrating his word victory that he can't. His judgment is just clouded. He can't
I
come
was
up with
well, I was just
with an
trying so
answer.
hard to work it into the sentence. I couldn't come up with an answer.
Give me a break.
I still like the term de-incentivize more.
I do too. I'm gonna
To
say
be honest
that.
with you, I
Yeah.
still I'm gonna sound like an idiot, but it'll sound cooler while sounding
It's like the
maybe.
people that say irregardless when that's not a
Oh
word. It's
man.
just regardless. Yeah. Sorry.
Yep. Oh
But see,
goodness.
that's why you have to use the right word. Is people are going to be disincentivized to
Oh,
listen.
shut up.
Come on, man.
Oh my goodness. Anyway, yeah, I would say, my take on that. I think the world benefits when Christians do things for other Christians. And what I mean by that is, you know what, I'm going to take, so we sent money, and another guy in India graduated with Jack, I think, or a little, maybe 1 year behind Jack in Bear Valley. Great guy. He went over there and he had this really cool idea of, hey, let's get a osmosis system for the water, and that will provide clean water to these villages in India that people will come for miles. And so, yes, it was initially to kind of help the church, but it has been such an evangelistic opportunity where people will come from miles and miles, several different villages, and while they're there filling up water, they get evangelized to. Now, I think initially it was to kind of help the Christians in the area who were suffering from all sorts of diseases and struggles from the water, but they use that for that. I would say the same thing for a healthcare system or for a hospital. We want to take care of our own. We want to take care of the poor and needy and the sick in our church or whatever. We start this ministry, and next thing you know, we have more people coming to it. I think that's the natural progression of things. Is as the world as the church takes care of the church, it starts to take care of the world. And kind of goes out from there. And that's when people start to see there's something special about this. That's when it becomes an evangelistic opportunity. But I think it should ideally start with we're going to take care of our own and then see where it goes from there. I'm with Jack. I'm definitely more on the cynical side of things. Uh, I know that's not nice, and that's not what we're called to be as Christians. So that's probably a heart issue that I need to pray about and work on. Man, I see a lot of people take advantage of churches where churches give and give and give. And it's not like you need a return for it. That's not the point of giving. But at the same time, once again, we cross over into the enabling point at some point where the person doesn't have to get a job because the church is bankrolling them. That's not appropriate. So I think every church and every eldership and or men's meeting or whatever needs to determine what their threshold of giving is, what they're willing to give, maybe to non-Christians and to Christians alike. We want to be cheerful givers, but at some point we have to pump the brakes, I think, a little bit. So, fellas, with that, I want to get into the last, unless there's anything else you want to add, I want to get into the last part of our outline here and the last part of the discussion, which is some people will say, and Jack, I'll kick this off to you first, I think. Some people will say, well, it's a good idea on paper, right? It's a good idea on paper. And you created the outline. You've kind of given that line, you put that line down, and we've all heard that before. What do you mean by that? And let's let this kick us off into a discussion of are there any valid points to socialism here?
I hear this all the time, and it's almost like people are trying to throw them a bone. Well, yeah, you're trying to be a nice person. You're trying to come up with a way to feed people and give them health care, and but socialism, it just doesn't work. Now it works on paper, but people are greedy. Well, if something only works on paper, but it doesn't actually, I mean, you can
Then it doesn't work.
yeah, I mean, my 3-year-old can draw an airplane on paper. It's not gonna fly. I mean, like that's because you say, well, it's because of human nature. Exactly. Exactly.
That's
You
why it doesn't
are
work.
right. And that's, I mean, Marx, it was everything was raging against God, was raging against created order, was raging against humans and who we are, but not even in a bad way. It's not, the people say, well, people are just greedy and that's why it doesn't work. If people weren't greedy, you wouldn't have people trying to get to the top and control everything. Like, no, I mean, the greed is an issue in every system, capitalism, socialism, whatever else. But the other thing is work is good, achievement is good. Anything that I'm not doing this to get the laugh again here. It's anything that disincentivizes, I had to use the word, sorry. Hard work is
Yeah, that's the
not
point.
a good thing. And so people say,
Yep.
oh, on paper. No, not on paper. Don't give them that concession. This is a terrible idea because work is good. Achievement is good. And this whole system is against that.
But is there any point or is there any positive, like why do you think this is such, we kind of laid it out at the beginning, but why do you think this is so popular specifically among kids these days? Is there any point of validity in their argumentation? I guess anything that we would say, you know, okay, we can agree on X, Y, or Z because this is sweeping the minds of young people. I mean, it's just across the nation. Because it sounds so good, as we talked about earlier, are there points of validity within this? Things that we think
The
maybe the church could address?
the cynical part of me says the only reason young people are sweeping up with this is young people don't really want to put the hard work in to make the money.
Mm.
And so they would just rather have the people who have already made the money have, again, have it reallocated and redistributed so that they get to enjoy the prosperity as well. That's the cynical side of me. It's, again, mainly for the young people that are all the Bernie Sanders supporters and, yeah, man, forgive my student loans and all this stuff. It's like, yeah, have the common sense to realize that those aren't free. It's not like just the debt is just disappearing and getting vaporized. But as far as the valid points and validity, I don't know. I'm a pretty staunch capitalist in the sense that it's the best economic system out there. And so you could argue, the fact that there are people who just are in the, as far as capitalism goes, they just want to make more and more and more and more and more and more and more. And that's a problem. But to Jack's point, like he just said, greed is going to be a problem in every system. And so
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of valid points to socialism. Jack, I know you've got some listed here. I don't know if you want to cover some of these, but yeah, I don't have much as far as, yeah, well, socialism gets this right. I don't think it gets a lot right personally.
I think the critique may be right. I think the way it goes about solving it is brutally
By
wrong.
what do you mean the critique?
I think, capitalism, when it's taken to I'm not against capitalism, clearly. I mean, I like the idea of everybody being able to make money, American dream, those type of things. So I'm not against capitalism. However, capitalism without virtue, capitalism without, which I think is really what we're getting to, making money for the sake of making money, where you will step on. I mean, how many lives are lost? How many sweatshops are kept open because of greed and making money? I'm not saying that there's ways that it doesn't have to. We're not raising the minimum wage to $20 so everybody can, not, you know what I mean? There's ways to do it, but I do think that in our current American society, we have gotten to the point where we make money without ever thinking about lives, in a lot of ways, and specifically lives in other countries. You could talk about this is why unions were formed. Unions, there's problems for everything, right? So I don't know. I don't know that our current system in America is working, and socialism certainly isn't going to fix it. But I also think that in pursuit of the almighty dollar, kids are exploited. There's all sorts of terrible things that take place. That would be my problem, is the capitalism without virtue. Jack, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean that was kind of my thought on it is capitalism generally is good, but people say that, the market incentives kind of bring the virtue in. Like, well, if you poison your customers, then, you're not going to have more customers, and therefore you're incentivized to do good business and to
Offer the
provide,
best product,
yeah, offer
basically.
the
Yeah.
best product. But what you're seeing is there's a lot of people who go, you know what, that's going to be a problem long after I die, so I don't care. I'll like while I'm alive, I'm gonna get super rich off of this, and I'll just let somebody else clean up the issues later on. And so there's that without virtue, and I mean you see, not to bring him up 2 months into his run, and Brad had an article on him the other day, the Oliver Anthony thing about like something's wrong with this country, and I think that's the what all of the political world is acknowledging from every side of the spectrum is there's something wrong with it. And Will, you're right to a degree of work harder, and you can find a way through for sure. On the other hand, it's really not in a good place where it is kind of. I was having this discussion with friends the other day about the whole women working outside the home, and you want to provide to where your wife can stay home, but that shouldn't mean that other than like people in very specialized fields have to work 80 hours a week and never see their kids. Like
Right.
there was a
Yep.
time not that long ago where you could work in a factory, didn't have to have anything more, didn't even have to have a high school education. You could own a modest home and a car and go on vacation once or twice a year, and like you could just live. Now you do have to have the side hustle. You got to drive Uber, you got to deliver food, you got to, whatever else to keep your head afloat. Like, and you can and you should because hard work's good, but those aren't good things. And so the critiques that socialism comes in with is pointing to all that stuff. It's like, and so that's why it resonates. It's like, yeah, that kind of stinks. But then, okay, well, we'll just take it from somebody else. No, that's not how it works. And so I don't know. There
And the
again, as Joe said, their solutions are horrible. But I mean, it is fair to say that it's not at a good place right now.
and the demonization of the 1% comes from the fact that a lot of them do cheat taxes. They do get out. And yes, I realize they're loopholes, but they're big enough to have laws be written to support the loopholes. You know what I mean?
Well,
Like
you look at
they're
something
the
like
ones that get in.
Amazon. The reason Amazon, everyone loves Amazon because you get your product for cheapest, you get it fastest. They got to be Amazon because the government gave them backdoor deal, well, not backdoor, but just like deals to say, well, people won't have to pay tax on yours, or you'll get, all of these savings,
There's
all
no
of these
sales tax.
incentives, all these breaks that you and I wouldn't get if we started a business. And so it's they're saying, look, the playing field is tilted. Well, yeah, it is, and we benefit from that to a degree, but then we suffer from it in the long run, and so it's yeah, there's so many things like that where, and you look at COVID. I mean, in 2020, when they switched everything, everybody's ordering everything online, and how many new billionaires that created, the wealth transfer people talk about. That's not a healthy thing for a society. Of a lot of people have gotten a lot poorer. Your inflation, all the money, like all of the added expenses that we're having to work even harder to keep up with, some people just got super super rich off of that, and that's kind of what the minor profits get at is if you're starving your own people or making it really hard for them to keep their head afloat while you're just getting fatter and fatter and fatter bank accounts, That's not great. That's not a good thing.
That is the problem with the American system is the middle class is disappearing.
Right.
You're having those that are getting a lot richer and those that are getting a lot poorer, and that middle class of what you're talking about, the factory worker, the guy driving a truck, the guy, the blue collar guy, like they could make it. They can't make it these days. Why? Because that's actually hitting poverty. There are parts. I think the poverty line in Denver, Colorado, I think is 80 grand, 75 or $80,000 a year is poverty line in Denver. Like there's a reason we moved. It's just insane to me. That's the problem is in our current economic structure. Yeah, you can get into the Fed, you can get into a lot of things. We're not going to, this isn't a political podcast. However, with, inflation and everything else, it's making it very, very difficult, which is why so many people want to turn to socialism. They're looking at it going, government created the issue, therefore government is going to fix the issue by redistribution of wealth. Once again, horrible way of solving it, but I do think that America has some struggles.
Let me speak to something real quick. We got like 10 minutes left. And we still
Sure.
have to hit something we want to give its due diligence to, and that is the kind of the underlying issues here that Jack referenced to start for Christians in the church. One thing I do want to speak to, because I fully resonate completely with what Jack said, and the strong language aside, the Oliver Anthony point about this country is kind of going down the tubes, and you've got rich politicians that are just making life tough for everybody while they're getting to live large. Like I resonate with that as somebody who's trying to make sure that I make enough money to provide insurance for my two kids and be able to have my wife stay home and homeschool and all these things that are very expensive, while also wanting to see my kids at some point. Like I get, like it's a struggle. It really is. Like I'm not saying that we should just work harder and it'll be fine. Like I get that it is a struggle. At the same time, I think Christians have a responsibility to have a level of faith in God to where if you look at your life and you're working hard and you're trying to make sure that your family's provided for and you're doing everything you can to disciple your kids, I don't want to just kind of cliche casually say it'll all work out. But I think this is where faith comes in. If you're sitting at home working 40 hours a week and you've got 8 to 10 hours to watch TV every day and you're struggling, that's one thing. If you as a father and a husband and you as a family are trying and working hard and doing everything you can to make money here and there and to do what you can to have your wife stay home and all these things, I would like to think that God will provide. That is something that the faith covers it in a way. Does that make sense? Like I
God
don't
blesses
want
it,
any
yeah.
I don't want anybody to think like, man, it is hopeless. There's just nothing I can do. I think the faith has to come in here of I'm working hard. I'm diligently trying to provide for my family. We're raising our kids, according to the Lord. God's not going to leave us hanging. And that sounds like, well, that's just a really easy cop out thing to say, but I don't want that to get lost in this discussion because I think it's incredibly important for Christians to keep that perspective. Like God's not going to leave them hanging if they're doing what they should and continuing to work hard.
I think that's true. I mean, he's not gonna, I think the Psalms say, he's not seeing the righteous begging bread. He's not gonna let you starve. And of course, Matthew 6, he takes care of the birds and the lilies of the field. And you trust those things for sure. It's just the unfortunate point of like, it's going to take that incredible level of work to scrape by. That
Right.
that he will, because those aren't promises that you're going to thrive. Those are promises that you'll have what you need.
Be able to eat.
And
Sure.
yeah, and so you do again. Like I kind of had this critique on Facebook a while back, and somebody really gave me the business. Well, you just need to work harder. Like, amen. You have to do it. Like you don't just say, well, I'll live off of the state and I won't provide for my family. You do what you have to do. It's just unfortunate that there is kind of that choice between, can I see my kids, more than 2 hours a day, like, or an hour in the morning and an hour before I go to bed at night because I'm working double jobs and double shifts and all this stuff. Like it's not ideal. And so I think again, that's where the socialists are critiquing that they don't care about the family so much, but just on the individual level. And it's a fair critique that, even though you are going to have what you need, man, it could be better, and so it's unfortunate that we've kind of come to a place right now where you see eggs at $6 a dozen at some point or whatever, and it's like, wow. I mean, like that is a kick in the teeth, and so I think that part of the critique is fair, even though yeah, God does provide. It's still really hard. It's harder than it's supposed to be, I guess, is what I'm saying.
And
And
I
I
agree
think
with
this
that.
is this is as we kind of get in the last bit. Um, I think we need to be careful when somebody is pushing it, understand them. listen to, where they're coming from and why they
You're
think
talking
the
about pushing
socialism.
socialism.
Yeah, because underneath it, I think it's stupid. I think we're laying out it's not biblical. There's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of problems with this that we are very much planting our flag here. However, there are a lot of hurting Americans, and there are a lot of people kind of lamenting this. And there are a lot of, I'm going to call it out, a lot of boomers that are just like, if you just didn't eat so much avocado toast, then we wouldn't be here. Like, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the avocado toast is why I can't make a $3,000 a month house payment when you got to make it at $800 a month. Come on now. Come
Right.
on
The whole
now.
like,
Stop.
I don't know why you don't just do it my way when, like the
It drives
Well,
me up a wall.
I saw a
Like, are
tweet
you
yesterday
kidding
that's
me?
true. I mean, this is literally true. He said a starter house doesn't exist anymore.
yeah.
That's
Price
right.
wise, there's no like a starter house. What would have been a starter house is now $300,000. I mean, this is a starter house. Yeah, we got a little bit of land on it, which is really nice, but it's going to take a lot of work. I mean, it's not. It's an older house. It's not in great shape, and it was difficult to get into. I mean, like his point is real. Of if you want something that is not a total piece of junk, it's almost non-existent.
So that's my point is just listen to people first and foremost when they're saying this, understand where they're coming from and a lot of times it's driven by hurt. Now, it's a lot of times driven by greed too, and it's driven by stupidity and driven by I went to the public schools and therefore redistribution of wealth is good. That they push that a lot in there and demonizing the 1%. So sure, that may come through as well, but you may have people that are genuinely struggling just lamenting the system. That's the Oliver Anthony thing. I can get behind the lamenting of the system. We find common ground on saying, yeah, that is broken. However, let's discuss, the ins and outs. But let's get to the end here, which is some of the bigger issues, the underlying issues. And I'll start. The first one is, this kind of it causes us to maybe step back and figure out what does Christian compassion look like. We've had this discussion, but Jack, get us into that a little bit of this kind of bigger issue of Christian compassion.
I think we talked about that of churches giving and on an individual level of giving. But I think about Ephesians chapter 4, and I had the reference down here. Yeah, it's 28 of let him who steals steal no longer, but work so that you can share. I read that one in 1 Timothy 6 of teach the instruct the rich to be rich in good works and share what they have. And there's a number of verses about that of work hard so that you can have, in 1 Timothy 5, where he talks about providing from your own. If you don't, you're worse than an infidel. The expectation in all of those is you're going to make enough to take care of what your basic needs, and then have a little bit to share. And so that should be the goal of every Christian, is to share, is to be, somebody in Acts 4 who can sell something and give to somebody else, or come in with the donation when it's in need. And the envy, the kind of zero sum game thought of socialism of, well, we got to take it from somebody to give it to somebody else. No, make more, earn more, build more, have more so that you can give is a good thought as a church and as individuals.
The other thing that I would bring up here, and we've hit this quite a bit, so we can move on, but we talk about how the church kind of demonizes the wealthy. It also glorifies the poor in a lot of instances, kind of the insinuation that the poorer you are, the more holy you are. And listen, like a lot of that is based in envy, in my opinion, and we've hit that already. But the thought of like, again, well, those who are wealthy and those who are rich, they just idolize wealth. So do those who are poor, because how many of them would instantly swap with somebody if there were no ramifications of, you take your position, I take mine. They're going to take the more wealthy position. And so it's based in envy. It's based in, again, kind of just this false, concept of, well, we need to strive, it's not, a rich man is going to be harbored into the kingdom of heaven, so let's run the other direction. That's not biblical. Again, to beat the horse to death, you're ignoring Proverbs. You're ignoring the very valid scriptures about working hard. And so this is something that we talked about in last episode. I think pulpits need to do a lot better job of teaching and preaching lessons about money that are not just the generic, vague, ambiguous, make sure you use your money to the glory of God and make sure that you get, like, man, come on. People need specifics. People need, more than just the generic, vague stuff about how to use their money and what God's word talks about money. And so that would be the only thing that I would say there, is that a lot of Christians, I would say, have a warped view of money. And I don't think pulpits and church leadership have helped with that. And I think it's time that we need to swap that around, because envy is something, and covetousness is something that is listed in all of those places in the New Testament as a pretty big sin, as something that God sees as a big deal. And that's not something that any Christian has any business being involved in: envy, greed, covetousness. And I think, again, just kind of the demonization of the rich, in a way, creates that envy. It creates that covetousness, fosters it, maybe I should say.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Another big issue, and really one of the last ones. I'll speak to this one because we have on here: beware of emotional manipulation and oversimplification. I can sympathize and empathize with somebody who is bemoaning where America has gotten. We have to be aware of them taking that emotional, that empathy, and distorting it, twisting it, manipulating it to where now, we're advocating for something that's horrible. And I think they're oversimplifying a problem by they're trying to fix it. Socialists are trying to fix a very complicated problem in simplistic and rather barbaric ways when you see the way it's carried out across the world. They kind of want to just wave their magic wand to something. So beware of the emotional manipulation. You see this a lot on Facebook or on social media where somebody is, you see somebody who goes without health care or whatever, and they kind of get the sob stories and they trot that out. And look, that's horrible. I hate when those things happen. I'm not saying that like I'm unaffected by it, but they're trying to take the
It's a
political, which
tactic that they're using.
that's exactly it. They're trying to blend the political, and they're abusing churches and looking at Christians as and using this as an attack against Christians by taking their political agenda and beating us over the head with some emotional sob story. Don't fall for the manipulation tactics. Don't fall for the oversimplification, and don't allow them to politicize our faith basically and make us out to be the bad guys because they have, because people are struggling. We realize people are struggling. There are better ways to handle it other than you taking my wealth and giving it to somebody else. That's not the way that this is, not the way it should go. But you see that a lot on Facebook from Christians and non-Christians alike, demonizing those who push capitalism, demonizing those who aren't willing to just have the state come in and take all of their stuff. It's a political issue. It's a complicated issue. It's a lot of things, but don't allow for the emotional manipulation is what I would say.
Well, one of the other things is so much of this socialism, but many other things is just trades on. Well, it shouldn't be this way. It should. You should get free healthcare. This is how they're all ought and ought not to be. Like, who's to say? According
Right.
to what standard? Where are you getting this should or shouldn't be? Like, it sounds good. Oh, well, everyone should get free healthcare. Okay, how? What are the consequences of doing that? Who's paying for that? Like all of those questions, they don't enter into these manipulative conversations, and you see that same stuff in the church. Well, women should be allowed to preach. Okay, why? What are we going to do about this? Well, men and women should be, there shouldn't be a head of the household. Well, there is. Okay, and like we have this sense of what should and shouldn't be. That doesn't matter at all. Literally doesn't matter. It's all in our heads.
Well, anything
I
else
don't
you'd
have
add to
much else
that?
to add. No, that's,
Okay.
I mean, a lot of people might be looking at it going, this is kind of a weird episode topic. There are underlying issues, is why we ended here, that illustrate why this is important and why this is a big deal. And, we started, I guess, full time. Jack started Think Deeper. What was it? 2018, like a long, long time ago. And we started it really full time at the beginning of 2022. And it was one of those things, like when we first got started, there were a lot of episodes that we lined up like, yeah, this would be good. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this. And then as we continued to lay out episode topics and things, you realize there are a lot of things that don't really get talked about. There are a lot of things that really don't get a lot of press in the church. And money is one of them. This kind of political system of socialism ties into money is one of them. And so, I want to thank you, gentlemen, just you two, for being willing. I mean, these are topics that I think the church needs to discuss. These are topics that don't get discussed. And so, want to encourage everybody who's listening. Obviously, we appreciate the comments on Facebook. For those of you who are Focus Plus subscribers, we always appreciate the comments and questions that we get from there so that we can roll those into our extended deep end segment. But I would say if there are other topics, if there are things that you're thinking like, man, my congregation, we haven't addressed this in a while, or man, I really don't know where to turn to find answers on this. We're not standing here saying we're the guys that have the answers to every single issue, but we are standing here saying we're the guys that are willing to at least discuss the issue. And
That's
we're the
right.
guys that are willing to at least, open God's word and see, okay, where should a Christian fall in this as closely as we can according to scripture, as far as according to our best understanding. That's what we are willing to do. We're not always going to get it right, But one of the to me, the biggest aspects of this podcast that we wanted to really hit home is we'll discuss the issues that maybe everybody else doesn't want to. And so again, long diatribe of me basically saying, if you've got something that you want us to talk about, if you've got a topic that you're like, man, I really want to hear about this, let us know. Reach out to us, message, Facebook comment, whatever it is. So that's all that I've got to say. Jack, Joe, I don't know if you have anything else to wrap us up with.
It's a great point. It's a great point. I was thinking as you were talking about, we discuss sex, we discuss masculinity and femininity, we discuss
Birth
cancel
control.
culture in the church,
Yeah,
birth control and IVF. And I mean, hey, that's what we are here for, to think deeper. And this is yet another episode. I'm glad you pointed out, Will. This is just one of those things we look around and go, man, nobody's really discussing money. And the socialism that's really creeping up on Facebook and in Christian circles. And we're seeing this on our social media and such, of like Christians really starting to advocate, young Christians really starting to advocate for this. So we wanted to reach out and say that. So yeah, just to double up your point, Will, I think that's fantastic. Let us know specifically. Again, subscribe, because those who subscribe and give us some comments and whatnot of, hey, these are some topics, that's going to shoot right to the top of our list. Hey, even if you don't subscribe, let us know. Facebook post, whatever it is, get a hold of us on social media, and we'll look to fit it in. But those who subscribe, of course, are going to get first dibs on where we go with this, and we'd love suggestions on what you'd like to hear. So, all right, fellas. Well, with that, we're going to wrap up, and thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.